The banquet had been designed to display unity, discipline, and royal control. Yet behind the polished speeches and formal smiles, one whispered sentence cut through the room with enough force to change a prince's future. Royal staff have now revealed what was said about Harry when senior family members believed no one else could hear, and why the words left even experienced palace aides frozen in place. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat at the center of a tightly controlled Windsor gathering, attended by Camilla, William, Catherine, Anne, Edward, Sophie, senior diplomats, and a small circle of trusted officials. A state banquet was a formal royal dinner used to honor important guests and project stability. Every seat, speech, and pause had been planned to prevent surprise. Yet during a break between courses, a senior advisor leaned toward the king and whispered, "Harry must never again be allowed inside the family's private decision-making circle." Several staff members heard the sentence clearly. Charles did not object. He lowered his eyes, tightened his hand around the table's edge, and stayed silent as the advisor continued describing permanent restrictions. The monarch felt trapped between his duty as sovereign and his guilt as a father. Any protest might appear weak. Any agreement could close a door he might never reopen. William caught enough of the exchange to understand its finality. The prince stopped answering the guest beside him and looked toward his father. He knew a private decision-making circle meant the small group trusted with sensitive family and royal discussions. Excluding Harry from it would not simply limit access. It would place him permanently outside the family's inner confidence. The whisper had not arisen by chance. Staff later disclosed, through a documented internal account, that a place card had originally been prepared for an empty symbolic seat representing absent relatives. Before the guests arrived, someone quietly removed it. A handwritten banquet memorandum carried the phrase, "No future confidential access," proving that the restriction had been discussed before dinner. Then the tension broke. A silver spoon slipped from a junior footman's hand after he heard Harry's name, followed by the words, "Never again." The brief sound cut across the room. Charles looked sharply toward the staff line, aware that the private sentence had traveled farther than intended. Anne noticed the altered memorandum beside her brother as the final course arrived. She read the marked phrase, then studied the king with an expression that suggested recognition rather than surprise. Someone had prepared the exclusion in advance, and the Princess Royal appeared to know who had ordered it. But the true force of that whisper could only be understood by examining the four people whose loyalties collided around the king's table that night. Saved. Faster delivery will remain the priority, with slight word count variation accepted. Harry was not inside the banquet hall, yet his absence seemed to occupy more space than any guest seated beneath the chandeliers. For Charles, the discussion carried the weight of a father's failure. For William, it reopened wounds that had never truly closed. And for Catherine, the empty place represented something more dangerous, a family division becoming permanent through decisions made in whispers rather than spoken honestly. Harry had already stepped away from the working royal structure, meaning he no longer carried out official duties on behalf of the monarchy. Even so, confidential family gatherings remained one of the last signs that he still belonged somewhere beyond public titles. Losing access to those private moments would mean more than exclusion from business. It would suggest that personal trust had disappeared as well. Charles carried two identities into the discussion. As king, he had to protect sensitive information and preserve stability. As a father, he understood that one sentence could turn distance into permanent separation. William faced a different burden. The future monarch believed the institution could not survive endless uncertainty, yet he recoiled from hearing his brother reduced to a security problem. Catherine had witnessed the cost of their estrangement for years, and she knew silence had only allowed resentment to harden. Charles finally asked whether the wording in the memorandum was too final. His voice stayed low. The advisor replied that uncertainty had already damaged the monarchy enough. The king looked toward the page, but he did not approve the answer aloud. William felt anger rise. He no longer trusted Harry with palace deliberations, especially after private conversations became public disputes. Still, erasing him from family life felt like something darker than caution. It felt like surrender. Catherine then noticed two versions of the seating chart. One carried a discreet notation beside Harry's name, indicating restricted personal access. The replacement version removed him entirely. A seating chart was the formal plan, showing where each person would be placed at an event. But this change exposed more than arrangement. It showed a decision becoming absolute. Sophie quietly told Edward that the argument was no longer about attendance. It concerned whether Harry would ever again be treated as a trusted son, brother, or uncle behind closed doors. Edward understood immediately, and the trusted confidant saw the sadness settle across his face. Charles reached toward the empty chair near a closed doorway, then stopped before touching it. The place had once been associated with his younger son. Now its emptiness appeared deliberate. Anne leaned toward William and warned that the decision had begun weeks earlier, during one private exchange that convinced senior royals the risk had become impossible to ignore. And behind that empty chair stood one private incident so damaging that senior royals later called it the moment the door finally closed. The Banquet whisper was not born from years of vague resentment. It came from one precise moment, a private telephone call that began as an attempt at reconciliation and ended with Charles staring at a silent receiver. What Harry said during those 9 minutes did not merely anger the palace. It convinced the people around the king that every future family conversation could become a weapon. Charles had arranged the call 3 weeks before the banquet because he still hoped to create a limited path for Harry to return to private family occasions. No courtiers joined them. No written agenda controlled the discussion. The king believed that removing officials would allow father and son to speak with unusual honesty, free from the guarded language used in formal royal exchanges. Harry entered the conversation, carrying years of anger and a desperate need to be acknowledged. He demanded a formal apology from William, and insisted that Catherine personally recognize the pain caused by the family's silence. Charles refused to speak for either of them. The monarch told his younger son that reconciliation could not begin through forced statements made by people who were not present. Harry's reply changed everything. He warned that he would tell the world why the palace is still afraid of the truth. The words came from a man who felt abandoned, but Charles heard them as pressure placed upon him during a vulnerable attempt at fatherhood. What had begun as an emotional opening suddenly felt like leverage. The call ended without farewell. Charles placed his phone face down, removed his glasses, and whispered, "I was speaking as his father." A secretary entered quietly and found the king staring at the screen, repeatedly reading Harry's number without calling back. William reacted with controlled fury when he learned what had happened through his father's documented account of the conversation. The prince accused his brother of turning private affection into a bargaining tool. Boundaries, he insisted, were now unavoidable. No future confidential exchange could take place without clear limits protecting everyone involved. The situation darkened when a secretary discovered that Harry had taken detailed notes throughout the call, even though Charles believed no record was being kept. Those notes were not published, but their existence convinced senior advisors that every private sentence might later be used in a public dispute. One advisor then cited the call while drafting the Banquet memorandum. He described it as evidence supporting permanent confidential exclusion, meaning Harry would never again receive access to sensitive family discussions. Catherine challenged that language immediately. She told William that protection might be necessary, but permanent exile imposed in Harry's absence would create a wound the family could never defend with honesty. That unresolved pain followed Charles into the banquet hall, where William finally confronted the man who had transformed a family crisis into an irreversible royal decree. The confrontation did not happen before the assembled guests. It unfolded minutes later inside a narrow private dining room, where rank offered no protection and silence became impossible. William entered first. Charles followed. Then the advisor responsible for the memorandum placed the disputed page on the table, and the future king asked the question no one had dared to voice: who had decided Harry was finished? William had requested the meeting as soon as the formal banquet ended. He wanted no guests, cameras, or household staff nearby. Charles agreed, but the prince insisted that the senior advisor who drafted the memorandum attend as well. A memorandum was an internal written instruction used to record decisions and guide palace action. William refused to discuss Harry's future until the person responsible for the final wording explained who had authorized it. William pointed toward the phrase, "No future confidential access," and accused the advisor of exploiting his father's pain. Charles had been wounded by the telephone call, but that grief did not amount to approval for permanent exile. The future king's anger carried an uncomfortable contradiction. He no longer trusted his brother with sensitive discussions, yet he could not accept strangers using that distrust to erase Harry completely. Charles defended the restrictions. The king said they were created to protect the family from another private conversation becoming public. William answered that protection without compassion could become punishment. Then he pushed the page across the table until it stopped before his father and asked him to read the word "permanent" aloud, while looking directly at him. Charles stared at the document but did not speak. The advisor finally admitted that Camilla's private secretary had requested stronger language. The original phrase, "temporary suspension," had been replaced with "no future confidential access," because her household feared continued uncertainty would encourage further pressure from Harry. Camilla entered after hearing raised voices. The queen consort denied ordering his removal, but acknowledged that her advisors believed another private exchange could become public ammunition. William told her that fear explained the decision. It did not justify making it irreversible. Anne arrived before anyone could answer. She carried an earlier draft recovered from the banquet file and placed it beside the amended version. In the margin, Charles had written 4 words by hand: "Leave one road home." The king touched the sentence as though seeing it for the first time. His private caution had survived on paper, but someone had stripped it from the final instruction. William looked from the handwritten note to his father. Harry might remain outside confidential decisions, but the family had never been authorized to declare him beyond return. Yet the king's handwritten sentence meant little unless someone could determine who truly controlled the decision and whether Charles still possessed the authority to reverse it. Royal decisions rarely emerge from a single command. They take shape through notes, briefings, whispered warnings, and carefully selected words placed before an exhausted monarch. As Anne examined the banquet papers, a disturbing pattern became clear. Charles had expressed caution. William had demanded limits, but somewhere between those positions, palace machinery had converted emotional uncertainty into a permanent sentence against Harry. Anne understood how easily that transformation could happen. Separate royal households prepared security recommendations, guest access rules, briefing notes, and confidential event protocols before presenting them to the sovereign. A confidential event protocol was the set of instructions controlling who could attend, what information they could receive, and how private discussions would be protected. Charles still held final authority, but advisors could shape his choice by controlling the language placed before him during moments of emotional pressure. Camilla felt the accusation closing around her. She told Anne that she had spent years being blamed whenever Charles made a painful decision involving his sons. The queen consort insisted that every restriction was treated as evidence she wanted the family divided. Anne refused to let the discussion become a defense of reputations. Harry's conduct, she said, might justify firm boundaries, but hidden authorship destroyed trust, because no one could tell where the king's will ended and an advisor's fear began. The earlier draft exposed the first alteration. William had requested supervised contact, meaning future private conversations would happen with agreed limits or a trusted witness. He had not recommended permanent exclusion. His wording changed after the document left his office. A handwritten initial beside the amendment identified Camilla's deputy private secretary. Through a documented internal explanation, The official admitted believing the queen consort wanted Charles protected from further emotional pressure. He had treated her concern as authority and transformed caution into final policy. Edward watched the king compare the drafts line by line. Charles began with anger, demanding names and dates. Then humiliation replaced it. The monarch realized that his hesitation had been interpreted as approval, while his private instruction to leave one road home had been removed. Charles slowly took off his signet ring, the engraved ring symbolizing his royal position, and placed it beside the papers. "My silence was not consent," he said. The room became completely still. The king ordered every version of the memorandum collected before dawn. He wanted the altered language withdrawn, the authors identified, and his original intention restored. Yet control had already slipped away. One staff member had copied the final document before the order was issued. By sunrise, however, the king's attempt to regain control had failed, because the words spoken in secret were already moving beyond the palace walls. Harry did not hear the news from his father. He did not receive a call from William, a warning from a courtier, or even a formal palace letter. Instead, the sentence reached him through a journalist asking for comment on his permanent exclusion. In that moment, the Duke understood that the family had debated his future over dinner, and that strangers knew the verdict before he did. A journalist contacted Harry's representative early that morning and quoted the exact Banquet phrase concerning his removal from future confidential family discussions. Confidential access meant permission to take part in private conversations involving sensitive royal or personal matters. The palace immediately opened an internal leak investigation, yet officials refused to confirm the memorandum publicly. Their silence only made the words feel more real. Harry first dismissed the report as another exaggerated story. Then his representative showed him the phrase, "No future confidential access." His expression changed. He read it twice, set the phone down, walked several steps away, and returned with one question. Had his father defended him when those words were spoken? Humiliation hardened into anger. Harry understood that his absence had been treated like an administrative problem, something to solve with paperwork rather than a family wound to confront honestly. He called Charles directly. The king answered, but the conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Harry accused the family of discussing his future without him. Charles replied that permanent exclusion had never been his chosen wording. The Duke said silence at the banquet made that distinction meaningless. Both men spoke from pain, and neither allowed the other enough room to explain. Charles tried once more. He told his younger son that the final language had been altered, and that William had objected to it. Harry went quiet. For years, he had believed his brother was the driving force behind every closed door. Learning that the prince had resisted the harshest wording disturbed that certainty. The palace expected retaliation. Harry could have released details from the earlier telephone call and exposed the king's private attempt at reconciliation. Instead, he instructed his team through a recorded briefing not to publish anything. It was the first time he chose restraint, when public revenge would have been easy. That choice did not remove the rage. It simply revealed that something beneath it still mattered. Then Catherine sent a private message. No explanation, no formal greeting, only 5 words. Speak to William without witnesses. Harry stared at the request longer than he had stared at the leak. The message offered no apology and promised no reunion, but it created the first opening in weeks. That single message from Catherine created the first opening in weeks and forced 2 brothers to decide whether anything remained beneath the anger. There were no advisors, no recording secretaries, no prepared statements, and no royal emblems placed between them. William and Harry spoke privately through a secure call arranged by Catherine, each man entering the conversation prepared for another battle. Instead, the anger slowly gave way to something more difficult, an admission that both brothers had used silence as a shield, even while blaming the other for building the wall. Catherine had insisted on one condition before arranging the conversation. No staff, legal representatives, or public relations advisors could join either side. She believed the brothers would fail again if every sentence was measured for future use. A secure call was a protected private connection designed to prevent outsiders from hearing sensitive exchanges. This one carried no promise of reconciliation. It offered only honesty. William spoke first. He confirmed that he had supported strict limits on confidential discussions involving royal business, but he had never authorized Harry's permanent removal from private family contact. The prince wanted boundaries because trust had been damaged. He did not want officials converting those boundaries into exile. Harry answered with bitterness. He accused his brother of allowing palace staff to describe him as a threat instead of a son and sibling. William did not deny the damage. He replied that repeated disclosures had made trust almost impossible, and every private conversation now carried the fear that it might later become part of a public campaign. The accusation cut both ways. Harry admitted taking notes during his earlier call with Charles, but said he had never intended to publish them unless the palace publicly distorted what was said. William understood the distinction, yet told him that creating a private record without warning had made their father feel exposed. Silence followed. Then the future king confessed something neither had expected. Seeing Harry's name removed from the Banquet chart had felt less like protecting the monarchy and more like watching part of Diana's family disappear. Their mother had already been lost. William could not accept paperwork making another absence permanent. He offered a narrow compromise. Harry would receive no access to state discussions, meaning confidential matters connected to government and royal duty. He would, however, retain a protected route to personal family contact under rules agreed directly between the brothers. Harry accepted one condition of his own. No advisor would again define their relationship without informing them. He also promised that future private conversations would not be used for public pressure. After a long pause, William said, "You are not coming back to the role you had, but you should not have to lose your father to understand that." Neither brother pretended the past had been restored. Both simply stopped allowing strangers to decide what remained. Their private compromise arrived just as the leaked whisper exploded into public view, forcing the palace to answer a question it had hoped to contain behind closed doors. By midday, the family's private fracture had become a national spectacle. The whispered sentence appeared across television screens, newspaper websites, and phones around the world. Yet one image captured the crisis more powerfully than any panel debate. A newspaper held against the railings outside Buckingham Palace, its front page displaying Harry's face beneath three words that seemed brutally final: "Never welcome back." Broadcasters framed the leak as a struggle between royal security and family compassion. Palace correspondents debated whether Harry had been excluded only from official duty or pushed out of private family life as well. That difference mattered. A royal role meant formal work performed for the monarchy, while family contact belonged to the personal bond between parents, children, and siblings. The leaked wording appeared to erase both at once. Buckingham Palace issued a short statement confirming that private arrangements remained under review. Officials refused to support the phrase, "no future confidential access," but they also avoided denying that Harry's future had been discussed. The silence between those two positions created more suspicion than reassurance. Charles watched the coverage without speaking. The king became visibly upset when one broadcaster described him as a monarch who had chosen the institution over his son without hesitation. He knew the sentence ignored his handwritten instruction to leave one road home. Yet the public had seen the final memorandum, not the doubt removed from it. William feared his demand for boundaries would now be interpreted as revenge. The prince had supported restrictions because trust had broken down. But permanent exclusion was never his aim. Catherine reminded him that defensive briefings would only deepen the crisis. The family needed one clear decision, not another struggle over who had said what. The pressure intensified when a major evening broadcaster revealed that two versions of the memorandum existed. One recommended supervised contact. The other imposed permanent exclusion. Staff began cooperating with the internal inquiry through recorded interviews, explaining that they had come forward because Charles had been made to appear harsher than he intended. Outside Buckingham Palace, a man placed the folded newspaper against the gates. The headline, "Never Welcome Back," faced the cameras. Beside him, a woman told a live reporter, "A prince can lose his job without losing his father." Harry watched the clip and heard a stranger express the distinction his family had failed to make. Charles finally summoned William, Anne, and Camilla. The king announced that no advisor would draft the response. He would dictate it himself. With the world demanding clarity, Charles could no longer hide behind drafts, advisors, or silence. The final verdict had to come from the king himself. The final decision did not restore Harry's former life, erase years of betrayal, or reunite the brothers beneath a false image of harmony. It did something more honest. Charles separated the crown's judgment from a father's love. In one carefully dictated order, he ended Harry's path back into confidential royal authority, but rejected the crueler idea that exclusion from duty must also mean exile from the family. Charles met privately with William, Anne, and Camilla and ordered the Banquet memorandum removed from every household file. A formal directive and official instruction carrying the king's authority would replace it. Harry would receive no role in constitutional discussions, operational planning, security briefings, or any confidential matter affecting the monarchy. The boundary was firm because trust had been damaged repeatedly, and the institution could not expose itself merely to create an image of peace. Charles then drew a second boundary. Invitations to purely private family occasions would be decided by him and William directly. No advisor could use implied authority to erase his younger son from personal gatherings. The king accepted that love could not cancel consequences, but he refused to let palace machinery decide where fatherhood ended. William supported the settlement. The prince said trust could not be restored through ceremonies, carefully arranged appearances, or one emotional conversation. Only repeated restraint could rebuild anything. Still, he agreed to protect the narrow personal channel created during his private call with Harry. Camilla acknowledged that her deputy's intervention had gone too far. The queen consort supported removing the permanent exclusion language because protecting Charles could never mean speaking over him. Anne recommended disciplinary action against the official who changed the wording, but the Princess Royal also warned that one dismissal would not solve the deeper failure. The leak had exposed a system capable of turning hesitation into policy. Charles informed Harry directly before the revised order was released. The Duke regained no royal privileges, security authority, ceremonial standing, or access to state secrets. He remained outside the institution he once served, yet he was no longer formally erased from the family into which he had been born. Charles tore the original page once down the center and placed both halves before William. The crown may close a door, a father must not brick it shut. Harry accepted that remaining a son did not restore him as a working prince. The king accepted that love could not repair every betrayal. Their settlement offered neither reunion nor revenge, only a painful truth the monarchy could finally defend. The Banquet whisper was meant to end uncertainty by removing Harry completely, but its exposure forced the monarchy toward a harder and more human truth. Duty could be withdrawn, trust could remain broken, and the past could never be restored. Yet even inside the crown, punishment did not have to become permanent emotional exile. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.